Live from Washington, D.C., this is Balance of Power with Joe Mathieu.
Lisa Cook's hearing ends with no ruling. Welcome to the Friday edition as a judge in Washington gives legal teams on both sides more time to make their case over President Trump's efforts to fire the Federal Reserve governor. We'll bring you to the courthouse here in Washington for a live report from Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall, where things just wrapped up, with insights this hour from Bloomberg's Michael McKee and from Natasha Sarin from the Yale Budget Lab. Our panel's in place. Bloomberg Politics contributors Jeanne, Zaino, and Rick Davis, they're with us for the hour. And we start, as always, on Wall Street. Charlie Pellet has the latest on the Friday trade from World Headquarters in New York. Hey, Charlie.
Hi, thank you very much. Not just a Friday trade, but a PCE Friday trade with the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ. They're all in the red right now. Tech being hit especially hard. Right to the numbers. S&P down 41 right now. 64.60, retreating from yesterday's record and falling back below 6,500. S&P down by 0.6%. The Dow down 130 now, down 0.3. We've got NASDAQ down 238 points, down 1.1%. NVIDIA, which reported this week, down another 3.3%. 10-year at 4.22%, with the 2-year currently yielding 3.62%. Spot gold up $32 the ounce, 34.49, up by almost 1%. West Texas Intermediate crude 64 even a barrel, down 0.9%. And Bitcoin down 2.9%, 108,668 right now on Bitcoin. Tech names after earnings, we've got Dell plunging by 8.3%. Marvell Technologies after earnings down by 17%. Again, recapping, S&P down 0.7%. Balance of Power continues right now. The Friday edition. Back we go to Washington. Once again, your host, here he is, Joe Mathieu.
All right, Charlie, many thanks. Charlie Pellet will have more on Wall Street about 20 minutes from right now as we keep tabs on the trading on this Friday. Welcome to the threshold of the weekend and the Friday edition of Balance of Power here on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Mathieu in Washington, where all eyes have been on the courthouse, just a couple of blocks from where I'm sitting, right where Constitution meets Pennsylvania Avenue. Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall has been there since before the sun came up. This is, of course, the emergency hearing for Federal Reserve Governor Lisa Cook and the president's efforts to have her fired. There was a big argument about cause and whether, in fact, the president has the authority here, whether due process will be invoked. Both sides left wanting. It's unclear exactly when they will be back, as the legal teams on each side have been given more time to provide more filings. Tyler brings us up to date and picks up the story from there at the courthouse. What else should we know, Tyler?
Yeah, hey, Joe. Well, this hearing lasted just under 2 hours, and we saw really both sides get some tough questioning from the judge during this hearing, because as you're outlining here, there's a few different issues at play. One is that today's case was really about Cook seeking this temporary restraining order, which would reinstate her into the role as the court process around the larger legal questions surrounding her firing ultimately play out. But that concluded with no ruling. We're not expecting anything earlier than Tuesday, as both sides now have time to file some additional arguments related to the case. And while today's ruling didn't really have to do with the broader case, we got a whole lot of insight into how both sides are going to approach that legal battle. And as you mentioned, really hitting the nail on the head there, the crux of this has to do with defining the idea of cause. And we heard from Lisa Cook's lawyers today that these allegations of mortgage fraud do not rise to that level of cause, pointing out a few different reasons why they feel that way, including that these allegations happened in 2021 and Lisa Cook wasn't appointed as a governor until 2022, so they are outside of her realm as a Federal Reserve official. In the court filing yesterday, it's worth mentioning, we did get a little bit more of an insight into what they're thinking here when it comes to a defense suggesting that if there were any discrepancies on these mortgage applications, perhaps it's a clerical error and that Lisa Cook did not have any intent to deceive anyone. Joe, I'll mention on the administration side, they have said that it is up to the courts to allow the president to define the stature of what qualifies as sufficient cause. They also pushed back on this notion that Lisa Cook was not given due process, pointing to President Trump's own social media post, saying that that should qualify as the necessary time that she could have had to respond.
All right, Tyler, we've got a lot to cover here. It's unclear exactly when they're going to come back, though, correct? Could it be as soon as Tuesday after this long weekend?
That seems to be our understanding. The judge had indicated that it's going to take her perhaps a little bit additional time here to weed through exactly what's happening, particularly when it does come to this TRO. We did hear from Lisa Cook's lawyer, Abby Lowell, earlier today saying that they're not expecting the Federal Reserve to act today, he said. He said that they're expecting the Fed to act once this is resolved in the courts, which then also raises questions about whether or not there needs to be this TRO in place, if this could move directly to an injunction for perhaps the longer duration of this legal battle. So it's still a lot of questions that we have to parse through. But as of today, the update is that there is no ruling, but we did get more insight into how both of these sides are approaching the broader legal case of her firing.
Tyler, many thanks, as always. It's been a long one for Tyler Kendall at the courthouse here in Washington. Bloomberg's Michael McKee has been watching this from his perch at World Headquarters. Bloomberg international economics and policy correspondent, the man who brings you the news from the Federal Reserve meetings, from the lockups, when the minutes are released. And he's with us right now again. Michael, do we know if Lisa Cook will be going to work in the meantime? What does this mean for her status?
Well, as Tyler just mentioned, the Fed basically said that they are not taking any action until the case is resolved. Now, what resolved means, we don't know. Whether that means the judge issuing some sort of restraining order or injunction to keep her in the job, or whether it means they're going to wait until we see what the legal case, how that's resolved. So we don't know, but it appears that she's been working from home, and she can still continue to work from home as far as the Fed is concerned for the time being. Now, before they left, the judge asked the lawyers to discuss the idea of skipping from the TRO to the injunction, as Tyler was talking about. And Abby Lowell, Cook's lawyer, said the one thing he would not do would be to agree to anything that disrupted the status quo. In other words, anything that pushed her out of the job in the meantime and allowed the president to put someone else in.
Got it. Interesting. Well, I don't know if we really learned very much today. We're still chewing on exactly how to define cause. Once this is resolved on a legal level, and I realize that could need some time because this will likely go all the way to the Supreme Court, does Jay Powell weigh in as the chair? When do we hear from him?
We probably won't, except for the fact that he's got to face the press after the September 17th meeting. The Fed is in the uncomfortable position of not being able to defend Lisa Cook because this is a private issue of hers. It's not part of the Fed's job, so they can't get involved in that. They have obviously a rooting interest in the president not being able to replace people on the Fed at will, but they can't say that either. So they're kind of sidelined for the time being. They will probably continue to make the case, though, that an independent central bank produces better economic outcomes for the countries that have them.
Well, whether we get a ruling here on Tuesday or not, we do know that we have an important date on Thursday when Stephen Myron sits for his confirmation hearing before the Senate Finance Committee. What are you expecting at this point, Michael? Because I'm thinking we could have a lot more fireworks than we would have before.
Yeah, it'll be fairly easy for Myron to parry any questions on Lisa Cook because he could say, I'm the chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors. I don't have anything to do with whether she's employed or not, and I don't know what cause means either. But the Democrats certainly will push him hard on some of the things he's written about. Of course, he is the one who came up with the Mar-a-Lago Accord idea. Yeah, right. And he also wrote a paper last year calling for significant reforms to the Federal Reserve Act, including allowing state governors to appoint the boards of directors of regional Fed banks, which would then probably enable them to control who's appointed as a regional Fed president. And obviously that would make the Fed even more political. So you can imagine some of the questions they're going to have. They'll also, I'm sure, say, are you just going in to be a toady for the president and vote for huge rate cuts because he told you to?
How will he answer that?
I'm sure he will say, no, I have lots of valid economic reasons for wanting huge rate cuts.
Understood. Michael McKee, it's always great to see you. On the Friday before a long weekend, this is a story that we saw coming here a couple of days ago. And to think that we're going into a long weekend with so little certainty on how this is going to end is really something. Natasha Sarin has been watching this as president and co-founder of the Yale Budget Lab, having spent time as Deputy Assistant Secretary for Economic Policy and former counselor to Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen in the United States Treasury Department. Natasha, it's great to have you back on Bloomberg TV and radio. How should we be looking at this today? This is going to be precedent-setting one way or the other.
You know, it's such a bigger issue than anything about Lisa Cook or anything about mortgages, in that you're in a situation where one of the fundamental institutions and sort of causes of American economic strength is the fact that we have an independent central bank that makes monetary policy decisions absent from political influence, based only on how it thinks about inflation and how it thinks about the labor market. And what you're seeing here play out is really a sort of potentially quite damaging conversation around whether that type of institution should actually be free from political influence. And the reason why I know it's pretty damaging is because we've actually done it before in the United States. We've had a politicized Federal Reserve in the Nixon administration that made rate decisions sort of according to how they would best be suited to help President Nixon win a presidential campaign. The result of that was that we saw the worst stagflation in this country in recent history, and inflation rise from 3 to 13%. So we're running some pretty real risks here, and they're quite substantial, and they're much bigger than any one particular individual or any one particular case.
So what's the Fed going to look like 6 months from now?
I hope that the answer to that is not that different than it looks like today. And part of what gives me a little bit of hope is that you're watching this all play out in legal proceedings throughout the judiciary that ultimately will get to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court went out of its way in a removal case that had nothing to do with the Federal Reserve to signal the importance of the Federal Reserve as an institution and its unique quasi-private, it called it, role in this economy, such that in that particular case, there were real limits on the president's ability to remove at will members of the Federal Reserve's Board of Governors, and particularly the chair of the Federal Reserve. And so I think in some sense they're laying, I hope, maybe I'm sort of hoping that they're laying the groundwork for being very explicit here that this is not a case in which you're going to allow the executive to have unfettered capacity to remove and install political operatives in these roles, but instead this is a case where the unique exigencies of the Federal Reserve demand that we remain an independent monetary policy institution.
Well, I don't know if, Natasha, you think that Stephen Myron's going to make the next meeting. There are questions about that. He's got his confirmation hearing next week. Looks like that, in fact, could happen. But Christopher Waller today is again calling for lower rates. He sees a quarter point in September and then more additional cuts over the next 3 to 6 months. The pace driven, of course, by incoming data. You can weigh in on the rate cut if you want, but there are worries that if President Trump goes through with this and Lisa Cook is in fact fired for cause, that you're going to see a big drop in short-term interest rates because of a Trump-friendly Fed, but that longer-term rates are going to keep rising for fear of a greater inflationary trend. Yeah. How do you see it?
And you know, it's really interesting. I actually think there is substantial room for debate, and you're seeing it among the members of the Federal Reserve Board right now with respect to how to navigate this particular economic moment. Because on the one hand, you have the most inflationary policies that we've seen in our lifetimes with respect to tariffs that are at a 18+% effective rate in the economy. And on the other hand, you have a labor market that's starting to cool. And so what you've seen Governor Waller say is he's in the direction of being concerned about the labor market. I will note that even the sort of dissent on the Federal Reserve Board at the moment is about whether you hold rates steady or you cut rates by 25 basis points. That's nowhere near the rate cuts that the president and the administration have called for. And so I think there is room for debate about whether the Fed waits or whether the Fed continues or starts to lower rates. But I actually don't think you're anywhere close or should be anywhere close to some of what the administration has been pushing. But the thing that's really important that you said there, Joe, is sort of the flip side of this, which is like, what happens? Let's assume that you're in a world in which the Federal Reserve Board decides tomorrow that we're going to lower interest rates to the 1%, the Fed funds rate to the 1% that President Trump has called for. Well, that's actually not going to do, it's like pretty counterproductive. It's not going to do to mortgage rates what the president might like to see, precisely because you might be changing the short-term rate at which banks borrow from one another, which is the Fed funds rate that the Fed controls, but you're not actually able to effectuate what mortgage rates or other rates we care about, small business loan rates, are in this economy, because that matters a lot with respect to what the market perceives as longer term trends in interest rates. And what the market's going to perceive is that, yeah, we did this politicized thing, but the result of that is we're going to be like we were in the Nixon administration, facing a very substantial inflationary outlook and forced to raise rates in the future. And long-term rates are going to be high as a result of that understanding. So in some sense, this is all incredibly damaging to the Fed as an institution and incredibly counterproductive to the goal of lowering interest rates in the economy. And if the administration would like to see that happen, I have a very easy solution for them, something over which they have direct control, which is roll back these excessively high tariffs.
We spent a lot of time talking about what could go wrong here, and I realize that there's now apparently a third mortgage application that may not help Lisa Cook's case, at least according to what we're hearing from the administration. But when we think about things that could go right as well, if this is going to be a precedent-setting ruling one way or the other, and Lisa Cook keeps her job based on, say, a Supreme Court ruling, what would that mean for Fed independence going forward?
I hope what it means is that we entrench in this country the sort of legal respect for the incredible importance institutionally of the Federal Reserve and the incredible importance to our country's not just economic security, but sort of place in the global world order with respect to the independence of this institution. And why it's like so critical is that it's taken, generations, decades to be able to be the type of country that enjoys the safe harbor premium, that is allowed to borrow at lower rates precisely because we're like a stable ship in kind of turbulent waters at times. And what happens if you are no longer that? And in some sense, that sort of credibility that took decades and generations to build, it can evaporate very, very quickly. And when you are no longer that, that translates into real economic costs. It translates into an environment that's not friendly for business investment. It translates to higher mortgage rates for households and for borrowers in this country. So I am hopeful that what we're going to see is we're going to see entrenched a respect for something that is so pivotal to our economic strength.
With all of this said, Natasha, and I'm out of time. I only have a couple seconds. Did the Fed do the right thing by not weighing in today in court?
I think that the Federal Reserve is doing exactly what it needs to and should do in this case. And as you know, they're named as a party in this suit. So it's a complicated sort of judicial dance for it to be doing, but they're doing exactly what they should be. And they have great lawyers there, as does the legal case mandate.
Thank you, Natasha, for joining, as always. Natasha Sarin, president, co-founder of the Yale Budget Lab, former deputy assistant secretary for economic policy, and former counselor to Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen. I'm Joe Mathieu in Washington. We'll assemble our panel next. Rick Davis and Jeanne Zaino on Lisa Cook on Bloomberg. Make sure to subscribe to the Balance of Power podcast. Go to Spotify, Apple, or whatever platform you like for your podcast. Find Balance of Power and subscribe. Listen anytime at our website, Bloomberg.com. Coming up on Balance of Power, Lisa Cook's emergency hearing finishes without a ruling on the Fed governor's status. We'll play it to the panel next. Rick Davis and Jeanne Zaino on the way, only on Bloomberg.
It's 1:21 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. Developing story, Kraft Heinz nearing a breakup announcement as soon as next week. This according to the Wall Street Journal. Kraft Heinz shares, they're up now by 1.7%. Stocks lower across the board. S&P 500 index very close to session lows, down 49, drop there of 0.8%, 64.52. We've got the Dow down 141, down 0.3. NASDAQ right now lower by 1.3%. Stocks are declining. We've got the 10-year at 4.21%. Right now, we've got the 2-year yielding 3.61%. Spot gold at $34.49 the ounce. Spot gold up 1% right now, higher by $32. West Texas Intermediate crude down 0.9%. WTI 64.02 a barrel. And Bitcoin now down 3.1%, 108,458 on Bitcoin. Petco Health and Wellness shares are surging after raising its earnings targets for the year. As the company's turnaround starts showing signs of progress, Petco, which uses the ticker WOOF, WOOF, up now by 20.4%. Other earnings news, Gap up 2.5% after earnings as investors weigh tariffs and sales trends. Heading in the other direction after earnings, Ulta Beauty down now by 6.2%. Recapping S&P down 0.8%. Balance of power continues right now. Back we go to Washington. Once again, your host, Joe Mathieu.
Many thanks, Charlie. We'll get back to Charlie Pellet in about 15, 20 minutes for more on the Friday trade. Watching Wall Street from his perch at World Headquarters in New York. We couldn't do the program without him. As we bring you news every day here, live from Washington, in many cases, market-moving news. It's a little bit more abstract in the case of Lisa Cook, but Wall Street is watching. The bond market certainly is. The judge did not indicate which way she was leaning in this emergency hearing today that started at 10 a.m. It concluded with no ruling, as the judge peppered lawyers for both sides, Lisa Cook and the administration, about 2 hours today without ruling on the Fed governor's request for a temporary order blocking her ouster. We're going to talk about this with the panel, along with the greater view on what the administration is trying to accomplish here. Beyond Lisa Cook herself, the firings that we've seen at the head of the CDC, BLS, and other agencies that the president is clearly shaping in his own vision. Something we talked about with Donald Ayer, the former Deputy Solicitor General, former Deputy Attorney General, joined us in studio today to express his concerns about the changes that he fears in some cases could be irreversible. Listen to what Ayer said.
What's far more important than any one of these situations is the pattern that's clearly emerged since the inauguration, which is a pattern of Donald Trump, in one instance after another, working to essentially overthrow the norms, procedures, checks of our process. And that's the real concern that we should all have.
We play it to the panel on our Friday edition. Bloomberg Politics contributors Rick Davis and Jeanne Zaino are with us. Rick is Republican strategist and partner at Stonecourt Capital. Jeanne, of course, democracy visiting fellow at Harvard Kennedy School. Ash Center, our Democratic analyst. Always wonderful to have both of you with us here. Rick, do you see it as Donald Ayer does, a test of the system? We certainly see Donald Trump trying to exercise the limits of his power as an executive. But is it a cause for concern?
Well, I think that anybody who is used to the sort of standard checks and balances that have existed, throughout the modern presidency would be concerned about the emergence of Donald Trump and sort of his unitary executive theory that is clearly being implemented in virtually every one of these instances. And certainly, his test to see if he can fire Lisa Cook, is a exercise of the concept that the Article 2 in the Constitution says the president has sole power to govern the executive branch, and he is testing every aspect of that in the first 9 months of office. And so in the extreme, a unitary theory like this could diminish the roles of the checks and balances in both the legal and the congressional side. So, yeah, it's something to keep an eye on because it's definitely a different approach to governance than we've seen really in our lifetimes.
He had 4 years to think about this, Jeanne, and a lot of people around him to help him succeed in these goals of pushing the lines of authority from the Oval Office. If you're a Trump supporter, this is all up. You're making America great again, but you've You've thrown down a number of flags and issued a number of warnings about the checks and balances that Rick Davis refers to. If they go away, can you ever get them back?
Well, we would hope so, but I think, challenging, legally challenging in court is not the problem. It's a lot. Mm-hmm. It's a lot for you to cover every day. It's a lot for all of us to watch. What is most concerning to me, though, is the fact that not just the president challenging his power if he does so and he listens to the rulings by judges, the fact that he is trying to upend any sense of agreement on what is truth. There's an old saying which says that when you don't adhere to or listen to facts, you abandon your freedom, because there's no way to fight back if we don't have an agreed upon fact, language, evidence-based understanding. And that, to me, is the most troubling aspect of what we've seen, whether it's the Bureau of Labor Statistics, whether it is, the issue involving the Fed. It's startling to me that J.D. Vance went out yesterday in an exclusive interview with another outlet and said that it doesn't really matter if what Lisa Cook did is illegal or not. What matters is she is not serving the president. And of course, that's not what matters here. You've got to follow due process, and we have to have an agreed upon understanding of facts in order to make policy in this country going forward. So that, to me, is the most troubling component. And the president has been pushing those boundaries in a way we've never seen before in the U.S., but we have certainly seen elsewhere.
You wonder if the checks and balances will be restored in Congress, Rick. So far, it really just has been the courts pushing back on this administration. But Bill Cassidy has been doing some hard thinking here when it comes to the CDC and the changes that have taken place there just in the last 24 hours. The CDC director was fired. 4 leaders in the agency resigned in protest. And yesterday we saw the rank and file walk out and hold a protest on the streets in front of the agency here. Senator Bill Cassidy got a promise from RFK Jr. that this type of thing would not happen and that vaccine policy would not be impacted by his personal beliefs. Now Cassidy says it's time to cancel the vaccine advisory meeting that's set for September, and that the Health Committee must provide oversight when it comes to these positions, either being fired or vacated through resignation. Is the Senate about to stand up here, Rick?
It's hard to tell. They have not to date. Speaking of exercising their powers of the Constitution, advise and consent on these presidential appointments is one of the most powerful aspects of their legislative authority. And, in almost every instance of the most controversial members of the Trump cabinet, they were able to become appointed by a tie-breaking vote by the vice president. And so there were not enough senators to stand up and say to Tulsi Gabbard, to JFK Jr., this is a no. And so they've kind of abdicated that most important role to hold the executive branch's feet to the fire, when appointing individuals to high office. So it makes sense that Cassidy's going to want to understand what direction this administration is going on vaccine policy before they implement it. That is the proper role of oversight. I would not be surprised if they stiff him and say, we're going forward with this committee and we're going to implement the rules to make America healthy again.
Wow. Well, RFK Jr. in a memo to staff, Jeanne writes, reform does not diminish your work. It strengthens it. Is he right?
There's nothing wrong with reform. The problem is that he apparently, if we are to believe the reports that are coming out, is not listening to, taking the advice of, even meeting with those experts in the CDC who have the knowledge to advise him properly. So I am really curious to see what this report comes out on autism and the connection between autism and vaccinations, which has been widely discredited, obviously. And we heard just the other day in the cabinet meeting, the secretary promising President Trump, who has also expressed belief in that connection, unfounded as it is, that report was coming, and a lot of speculation that the director of the CDC was removed because she was pushing back on that. And again, we don't know. But, the secretary is talking about reform. We welcome reform. The CDC needs reform, but you simply cannot lose all the knowledge in an institution and then reform it properly, bringing in people who have no expertise, in this case, in science or medicine.
We heard from Dimitri Daskalakis. He's been doing some interviews, Rick. This is the director of National Center for Immunization and Respiratory Diseases who quit. He resigned yesterday, and his resignation letter made the rounds. We were talking about that. He did an interview with The Atlantic and said no one from his center had ever been allowed to brief the secretary, RFK Jr. Quote, "I'm not sure where he's getting his information other than Substacks that are erroneous," unquote. What's going on inside of the HHS?
Well, this was the motivation behind Senator Cassidy and his questions of Secretary Kennedy before he was willing to give him a vote on his nomination is, put a rein on this issue of attacking the vaccine policy that exists today. And he got a commitment, and that commitment didn't last 9 months. So I think that there's a lot of realization in the Republican caucus of the United States Senate that they are a party to this kind of dismantling of government. Jeannie's right. You can reform an agency without losing its expertise. Virtually every administration puts its stamp on it like that. But then to drive very talented people out and replace them with folks who have no basic experience in the subject matter of the agency is not going to build confidence with the American public. And again, we started this segment, earlier this hour talking about whether or not Donald Trump has the potential of overreach and losing the confidence of the American people. And I would say issues like this tend to drive you in that direction.
This is quite a moment we're in. Next Thursday, by the way, will be the hearing, Senate Finance Committee hearing for RFK Jr.'s testimony, and there are going to be some tough questions, I'm sure. Many thanks to our great panel on the Friday edition. Rick Davis and Jeanne Zaino, Bloomberg Politics contributors. I hope you both have a long weekend, and we'll see you back here on the Tuesday edition. Not to mention the late edition later on this evening. I'm Joe Mathieu in Washington. Stay with us. We have more to cover here on the fastest show in politics. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
It's 1:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. We have got the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ all in the red right now. Traders driving stocks lower amid a sell-off in tech shares that have indeed been powering the surge since April's meltdown. Right now we have got S&P moving lower by 46 points. Yesterday we closed above 6,500. Right now 64.56 on the S&P, down 0.7%. The Dow is down 115 points, down 0.2%. NASDAQ Composite Index down 270, a drop there of 1.2%. This morning we got inflation data that did little to alter bets on Fed rate cuts. The 10-year 4.21%, the 2-year 3.61%. Spot gold now advancing 0.8%, 34.44 the ounce. West Texas Intermediate crude below $64 a barrel, down now by 1%, and Bitcoin is down 3.1%, 108,400 on Bitcoin. Company news: PepsiCo increasing its stake in Celsius Holdings in a $585 million deal to boost distribution of some of Celsius's popular beverages. Shares of PepsiCo up by 1%, Celsius up 3.3%, rival Coca-Cola up 0.8%. Again, recapping, stocks are trading lower. S&P right now down 45, a decline there of 0.7%. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. Back we go to Washington. Once again, here he is, Joe Mathieu.
Thank you so much, Charlie. You should come down. We've got a big weekend down here in Washington. A long weekend, Labor Day. The markets are closed on Monday. We'll do the Smithsonian or something. You know, they're keeping it safe. This has been the big story here most recently, and there are questions about whether other cities will follow. I'm talking about the federalization, or I don't know if I can use that term, the introduction of federal law enforcement working alongside D.C. police here in Washington. They added, of course, armed National Guard troops. We've been talking about this for a couple of weeks. Questions now about what happens when lawmakers come back to town and whether they'd like to see more of this for longer, because it would take an act of Congress to maintain this beyond 30 days. Not to mention other cities. The president floated Chicago, New York, and others. Speaker of the House was on Fox this morning talking about it. Listen to what Mike Johnson had to say.
I'm all for it. I told the president, and yesterday morning we talked about this, and I said, we will give you the resources and the authority necessary to complete this job, because it is wildly popular. You've seen the Democrat mayor of D.C. came out and said, thank you for the reinforcements. We have to bring law and order back. We're the party. He's the president to do it, and we're going to show that to the people. The statistics are overwhelming, and it's ridiculous for him to deny that he needs assistance with that. So I hope the National Guard does go to Chicago.
Well, we'll see if that happens. But we thought first we'd spend some time with the resident of Washington, D.C. you may have heard of. His name is Patrick McHenry, Bloomberg politics contributor, former Republican Congressman, of course, former chair of the House Financial Services Committee, and yes, former House Speaker pro tem. It's great to see you, sir. Welcome back. You live on Capitol Hill, which has been known to see a little bit of crime. Lawmakers come from all different parts of the country, including a lot of rural areas who may not be used to the game here in D.C., where we've seen carjackings and a lot of other stuff, even if, albeit, crime rates are at what they say is a 30-year low. So what's the mindset going to be among the Republican conference when they come back and Donald Trump asks them for more time?
Well, first, lawmakers, both parties, traverse a very narrow range of Washington, D.C. They're not here for tourist attractions. They're on Capitol Hill and a few blocks from Capitol Hill for meetings and dinners and breakfast, and that's about it.
Yeah, okay.
And so for their vantage point, they have Capitol Police, you have Metro Police, D.C. Metro Police. They're well covered for basic security measures. Having said that, you've had some high-profile cases of Democratic lawmakers, Republican lawmakers experiencing carjackings, physical assaults just a couple blocks from the Capitol. So that's speaking to something that's very real in urban America today. Coming off of COVID, the stats were incredible. For how bad D.C. and a lot of places like Chicago have been. And so there is a perception across America, for the rest of America, that there is an urban crime problem. And that's why you see the president speaking to this. And so is there something to it in urban America? Yes. Is it as dramatic as I think it's made out to be by the White House? Not really. But these aren't great stats. And the mayor, the Democratic mayor of Washington, D.C. is saying, look, these things do have a positive impact on reducing crime rates, the attention to the matter. But if we take the attention off, then the crime will reappear unless we change.
Okay. So what happens when you start adding other cities? It's one thing, the federal city gives the president a lot more leeway. If you're going to roll into Chicago like this, particularly with National Guard troops the way we saw in L.A., it's a different construct, and the pushback from Democratic governors has been very loud, of course. Is there a line for Republicans, for lawmakers on this when it comes to other cities, or when it comes to the difference between federal police and the National Guard?
Well, frankly, it's for the voters of those jurisdictions to vote in people that are going to keep them safe. We saw this in San Francisco, a dramatic reversal in San Francisco from a very soft on crime regime in an all-Democratic city to a now tough on crime regime with encampments and assaults, vehicles disappearing, CVS is being raided, every store, like every retail store possible being raided, and they voted in a new government. Chicago's got to do the same thing. If they want something better, they've got to vote for something better and to get different results.
But you're also saying that it's not up to Donald Trump, it sounds like.
It is not up to the president to keep mismanaged, badly run cities and save their politicians or give their politicians a foil to keep inept government in. That's my view.
Yeah.
There's enough for us to preside over with national security measures, international challenges, tariff issue, economic issues. We've got big things that we should be focused on. The political class in Washington should be focused on, and especially the president.
Like funding the government, say?
Yeah, some of that basic
Everyone
stuff.
turned away from all this shutdown talk and the rescissions and how much Democrats and Republicans can't trust each other because we got into the whole Epstein thing and we got into the throes of summer news. We're not done with that. So what's top of mind as lawmakers come back? And are we going to be hearing about Epstein next week?
Sure.
Will we have a shutdown?
Sure. You have the FBI director and the testifying before the Hill in the month of September, in 3 weeks from now. There'll be discussions of that, discussions about keeping the government open, discussions about the president's nominee for the Fed seat that was previously open. Yeah. And so there is so much going on. It's hard to
hearing next week, an RFK Jr. hearing. When it comes to appropriations, though, is the conventional wisdom correct here? We're shutting down. It's just a question for how long?
Well, it's really open to the Democratic minority in the Senate. In the House, Speaker Johnson showed that they can pass a continuing resolution like they did in March, which was its own political miracle because House Republicans have not previously been able to do that. So kudos to Speaker Johnson.
Chuck Schumer's got some tough decisions to make.
This time around, just like in March, it's Schumer's decision. You have enough Republican votes to pass something, but not to get to the 60-vote cloture vote that they need to have for funding the government. So it is in Schumer's hands. And so the focus should be on him, on what he wants, his expectations, because he's going to be the decider on whether or not we have a government shutdown.
Boy, okay. If we do, every Democrat we've asked has said, yeah, but we can't do it unless there's a plan to reopen it. Because if Donald Trump gets this thing closed, he has no interest in reopening it, right?
Let me just tell you, Russ Vought, the budget director for President Trump, has so desperately wants Chuck Schumer and the Senate Democrats to shut the government down.
This is really important because what will happen?
We will find out. But he has a plan. He has an intricate, detailed plan, and the goal is to win the shutdown. Republicans have previously not won shutdowns in the 90s all the way through just a few years ago. So not winning shutdown, he intends to change that. And he's thought deeply about it for a very long time, and Schumer may give him that opportunity either October 1st or sometime late in the fall or into January.
If it happens, it's a record, right?
It would be a record. It will be bad. And it will be bad particularly for Democratic politicians who did not fund the government. And a government that they helped fund and build and that they are in defense of as a party, it would be a very bad thing for Democratic politicians. So what I would tell my Democratic friends is get out of the way of your own folly here and fund the government, get out of the way, and move on to some other more serious fight for the ballot box at the midterms. Okay. And if they don't do that, then it's going to be a tasty, great fight for the White House against congressional Democrats.
October is going to be a riot.
It's going to be wild.
Yeah.
But for us to sit behind the microphones, much more interesting, right?
A shortage of things to talk about. Democrats would say, though, hey, you guys did that rescission package, so we can't trust you in a budget deal anyway. That's why we're not willing to vote for this. And Republicans say, yeah, and we're going to do another one.
Yep.
Is that coming?
Yeah. Absolutely.
What will it look like?
Well, they've got to determine that and determine the type of fight they want to have about that rescissions package. But the point is, right now we have currently the largest federal government we've had outside of wartime. In the history of the United States, we have the largest federal government outside of wartime. That is too big. As a percentage of our economy and raw dollar numbers, we have a government that's too big that we cannot afford as a great society. We have a government, if you match state, local, and federal, that tells Europeans that they're not running a socialist state. We are. So we've got to get our financial house in order and to prioritize that fight. I think the president is doing a very good job of bringing that to the fore.
We haven't even mentioned the word tariff since we've been talking this time, which is usually something that we get around to. Is Congress kind of hands off the reins on this? Will there be a congressional answer to tariffs now that they appear to all be in place? India just got sacked with 50% this week. We're waiting for news on China, but everyone else has a number right now, Congressman.
Well, I will tell you that President Trump has complete mastery of the Republican Party. There are folks on the Hill that hate tariffs. They will remain quiet. And the president is there to go get a big deal on trading arrangements. Now, all of this is noise, right? Landing, where do we end up with India? Where do we end up with Mexico? Yeah. Some very key decisions are still out. But it all brings to focus the main thing here. The main thing is our trading relationship with China and the globe's trading relationship with China. That cannot be missed in all of this. There's a lot of stuff in Washington, a lot of noise, but that is the signal you got to go follow. And the White House is very focused on, and Treasury and Commerce are very focused on landing a deal with China that is durable for the long term.
How well do you know Lisa Cook?
A little bit. I interacted significantly with the Fed.
Sure you did. That's why I asked.
Yeah.
This is someone who's been vetted already, who's being questioned now on apparently 3 mortgage applications. There was a big emergency hearing down the street arguing about cause. They left without a ruling. How concerned are you about the Federal Reserve being impacted, its credibility being impacted by this?
Well, it is concerning. It is concerning, the reputational damage to the Fed, number one. Number two, the question of one person getting bounced from the Fed, which is what we're talking about. One appointee getting removed for cause. The courts have to decide on this. It's a 110-year-old statute, untested. No previous governor has been removed by the president. Although the act says this, it's not been tested in the courts. It'll be tested in the courts. We will find out. And that will be that's determinative on the act. That does not mean the Federal Reserve is no longer independent.
Yeah.
It's what comes next that could unravel Fed independence. If you, and so those are the things.
Who is named?
Well, in terms of what other precipitating acts can impair the Fed's independence.
Like reaching into the 12 regional banks?
Correct.
Okay.
And so you have that as an open question. You have these independent boards. The nature of the Federal Reserve is built on the nature of our constitutional checks and balances. And that means separation of powers and representative banks. So we have a diverse group of banks across the country that are supposed to be the voices for that region and know what's happening in the economy, bring those lessons to Washington, and be that region's voice. Yeah. It is a very complicated structure. The Federal Reserve is different, distinct than other pieces of congressional creation. The Supreme Court has ruled that and has opined on that, that it is special and distinct in the nature of central banking back to the first and second Bank of the United States and the founding fathers that were still alive and writing those statutes around the central bank at the time. So those things are tested. The Supreme Court has already opined on this. Now it's a question of lower courts making a determination on whether or not they follow the statute and in the clear letter of the law.
Stephen Myron going to have a hard session next
week? Oh my
week?
gosh, it's going to be the craziest.
So that's fireworks.
It's going to be the craziest fireworks on any Fed governor nominee.
Wow, all right. This is going to be
wild to watch.
Something else.
Yep.
Senate Finance Committee will be, of course, interpreting this with the help of the great Patrick McHenry. It's always a pleasure to have you. Bloomberg Politics contributor, former congressman. I'm Joe Mathieu in Washington. We'll meet you back here for the late edition, 5 p.m., Balance of Power on Bloomberg. In the meantime, make sure to subscribe to the Balance of Power podcast. Go to Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast to hear our full conversation with Patrick McHenry and listen anytime at our website. It's Bloomberg.com.